Brace
The
yourself.
time has come.
Human warship is on the way.
The
The
stars
distress
will
signal
witness our
had been running
victory.
for 6 hours before anyone picked it up. It was not a clean signal. It broke apart every few seconds, cut by the Dravak jamming grid that sat like a heavy fog over the Ulvan corridor. But the Lithari knew how to hide messages inside static. They had learned that trick 3 wars ago from a species that no longer existed. So the signal went out in pieces, in gaps, in the quiet spaces between interference pulses. Ambassador Sova was the one who sent it. She sat alone in the back room of the relay post, a small cold space with metal walls and one flickering light, and she spoke into the transmitter with the steady voice of someone who had already made peace with the possibility of failure. She listed the coordinates. She listed the colony worlds under blockade. She listed the Dravak ultimatum, word for word, because she wanted whoever received the message to understand that this was not an exaggeration. 14 Dravak warships, 3 colony worlds, 72 hours to surrender full territorial rights to the Ulvan corridor, or the sovereignty would begin orbital bombardment. She had sent the signal to 11 different receivers across 4 different systems. She had heard back from 9 of them. 8 said they had no ships available. 1 said they were sorry. The council chamber down the hall was full of quiet people doing quiet math and arriving at the same answer. There was no military force within range that could break a Dravak blockade of that size. The Lithari had scouts and science vessels and 2 old patrol ships that were never meant for combat. The nearest Allied fleet was 22 hours away and had already sent word that engaging 14 Dravak warships without support would be suicide. Sova stayed in the back room. She sent the signal a 10th time, pushing it out to a wider band, to older receivers she was not sure were still active, to frequencies she had found listed in a communication archive from a species called humans who had joined the Galactic Compact 11 years ago, and who most council members still confused with the Hevari, because both were bipedal and pink adjacent. She did not expect an answer from that band. She sent it anyway because she had run out of other things to do. The answer came 4 minutes later. It was short, 11 words. No greeting, no identification header, no formal compact protocol opening. This is UNSS Iron Patience. Send coordinates. We are coming. Sova read it twice. She walked to the door of the back room and told the council. The council asked which fleet this was. She said it was 1 ship. The council asked how many ships were in the fleet group behind it. She said there was no fleet group, 1 ship, coming alone. The council was quiet for a moment. Then one of the older members, a diplomat named Ferris who had survived 2 border conflicts and a trade war, said that 1 human ship against 14 Dravak warships was not a rescue. It was a death. Sova did not argue. She went back to the transmitter and sent a reply asking the Iron Patience to confirm its armament class and crew count. The response came back in 2 minutes. Resolute-class warship, crew of 41, ETA 9 hours. Hold your position and do not provoke the Dravak fleet. Ferris, who had followed her back into the room, read the response over her shoulder. He said that a Resolute class was a mid-weight warship, old design, not a ship meant for fleet engagements. Sova asked him what he thought they should do. He had no answer. So they waited. The Dravak fleet sat around the colony worlds and said nothing. Their ultimatum clock ticked. In the council chamber, people stopped doing math and started talking about the terms of the surrender and whether any of them were survivable. Sova stayed near the transmitter. 6 hours into the wait, the Dravak fleet sent a scout toward the incoming signal. It was a fast little ship, a picket runner, designed for exactly this kind of advanced look. It reached the Iron Patience while the human ship was still 3 hours out and began its scan pass. The Dravak fleet commander, Admiral Vok, was a patient man by Dravak standards, which meant he was willing to wait 4 minutes for information before acting. He waited for the scout to complete its pass and send back data. The data came back in pieces, not because of jamming. The scout's transmission kept cutting out because whoever was on board was sending in a hurry. The final fragment that made it through before the scout went completely silent was not a tactical report. It was 4 words in Dravek military shorthand. It translated roughly as, "That is not right." Vox stared at the message for a long time. In the relay post, Sova heard nothing for 2 hours. Then the transmitter buzzed. It was the Iron Patience. The message said, 2 hours out. Inform the council to move non-essential personnel to the station's intersections. Things may get loud. Ferris read the message. He asked what that meant. Sova did not know, but she noticed that the Dravak fleet, which had been sitting still for 6 hours in a clean, tight formation, had in the last 20 minutes begun to shift. Small movements, repositioning, like 14 large animals that had heard something in the dark and were not sure yet whether to charge or step back. She thought that was interesting. She sent one more message to the Iron Patience. She asked, "Are you afraid?" The reply came in under a minute. "No time for that. See you on the other side." Sova saved the message. She did not know why, she just did not want to lose it. Rail Doran had a habit that his crew found strange. Before any serious engagement, he went to the ship's lower maintenance deck, where the noise from the engine cores was loud enough to feel in your chest, and he sat on an old metal crate and thought. No screens, no reports, just the sound of the engines and whatever was inside his own head. Nobody bothered him there. The crew had learned that early. He had been sitting on that crate for 40 minutes when his second officer, a woman named Petra, came down the ladder and stood at a respectful distance and waited. He looked at her. She handed him a printed scan report instead of speaking, because she also knew him well enough to know he preferred paper over voice when he was thinking. He read it. Then he read it again. The Dravek scout had come in fast and done a full sweep of the Iron Patience before something on board apparently caused enough alarm to make the crew abandon their sweep and run. Doran did not know what they saw. He had a good guess. The Iron Patience had not started its life as a combat vessel. It had been rebuilt 3 times since its original commission date, and the last rebuild, done in a private Martian dry dock under a contract that officially did not exist, had added things that did not appear in any public registry. The outer hull read like a Resolute class, standard configuration, mid-weight warship, old design, the kind of ship that filled convoy escort duty and made up the background of fleet formations. Nobody feared a Resolute class. But the inside was something else. Petra sat down on a second crate across from him and waited while he finished thinking. After a while, he folded the scan report and tucked it into his jacket and looked at the ceiling. He said that the Dravek fleet had shifted formation in the last hour. She said yes, nothing dramatic, small movements. They were nervous but trying not to show it. He said that was useful. Nervous commanders made formation decisions based on emotion. An emotional formation had gaps that a calm one did not. She asked him if he had a plan. He said he had 7. He was trying to decide which one wasted the least crew. Petra had been with him for 4 years. She had seen him in 3 engagements. She knew that when he said something like that, he was not being casual. He was being precise. She nodded and climbed back up the ladder. Doran stayed on the crate for 10 more minutes. Then he went back to the bridge. The crew was quiet when he arrived. 41 people on a ship built for 55, running a combat configuration that the manual said needed 60. They had been doing the same math the Lithari Council was doing and arriving at similar answers. The difference was that they had watched Doran work before, and most of them were choosing to wait for a better number. He pulled up the Dravak formation on the main display. 14 ships. He looked at them for a while without speaking. Then he picked up a stylus and started drawing lines on the display that did not look like attack vectors. They looked more like geometry problems. A young gunner named Adele, 19 years old and 8 months into his first deep space posting, watched the lines appear and could not figure out what they meant. He watched the commander trace angles and arcs and points that seemed to have nothing to do with shooting anyone. He leaned over to the crew member next to him, an older technician named Bors, and whispered that he did not understand what the commander was doing. Bors whispered back that the commander was figuring out where to stand. Adele said that sounded too simple. Bors said most things that worked were. Doran finished his lines and stepped back and looked at the result. He pointed to a specific position along one of the arcs, a spot in space that was currently empty, about 40,000 kilometers off the left flank of the Dravak formation. He said that was where they needed to be when the shooting started. Petra asked how they got there without triggering a full volley before they were in position. He said they moved slower than the Dravak expected. He said that fast movement looked like aggression and aggression invited reaction. Slow movement looked like damage. He said the Dravak would assume the ship was limping and would wait to see if it presented a better target. Someone at a rear station asked if they were going to pretend to be damaged. Doran said no. He said they were going to move slowly because they needed the Dravak to stay in their current formation for as long as possible. The longer they held position, the more time the Iron Patients had to reach the right angle. He said the angle was everything. From that specific point in space, 3 Dravak ships on the inner ring of the formation would be in their own crossfire if they shot forward. From that angle, a hit on the 4th ship in the outer line would send debris directly into the engine block of the ship behind it. From that angle, the entire left flank of the formation was exposed in a way that it was not from any other approach vector. He had seen it in the scan data 9 hours ago. He had been waiting to confirm it ever since. Adele stared at the display. He looked at the lines. He started to understand what he was looking at. It was not a battle plan. It was a position, one specific place in space from which everything else became possible. He thought about asking another question. He decided not to. He turned back to his station and checked his targeting system and made sure it was ready. The Iron Patients moved slowly toward the Ulvan corridor. Behind them, the stars were unchanged. Ahead, 14 red and black ships waited in a formation that nobody had told them yet was already wrong. The Dravak fleet did not fire immediately. That surprised Sova. She had expected the moment the Iron Patients crossed into the system that Vok would open up everything he had. Instead, the 14 ships held position and watched the human warship come in slowly, at an angle that looked almost casual, like a vessel uncertain of its own heading. Farah stood beside her at the observation window. He said the Dravak were letting it come closer so they could kill it more cleanly. Sova did not disagree, but she noticed that the Dravak formation was not adjusting to track the Iron Patients as it moved. They were staying still. She did not know if that was confidence or something else. The Iron Patients opened a channel. Everyone on the station heard it. Doran's voice was flat and unhurried, the way someone sounds when they are reading a document they have already read many times. He identified himself by name and ship registry. He stated that under Article 7 of the Galactic Compact, a military blockade of civilian colony worlds without prior Compact Council authorization was an illegal act of aggression. He said the Dravak sovereignty was in violation. He gave Admiral Vok a formal notice of that violation. Then he said, "You have until this ship reaches engagement range to withdraw your fleet. I am not going to repeat this." There was a pause, then Vok responded. His voice was the opposite of Doran's. Big, confident, carrying the specific warmth of a man who was very sure about where he was standing. He said that engagement range for a Resolute-class warship was approximately 80,000 kilometers. He said the Iron Patients was currently 240,000 kilometers out. He said that by his calculation, Doran had given him roughly 3 hours. He said he would be sure to use the time wisely. He closed the channel. On the station, Ferris exhaled slowly and said that was basically a polite way of saying thank you for the warning. Sova watched the display. The Iron Patience had not changed its heading. It was still moving in that slow arc, wide and unhurried. She had the compact observer's tracking system open on a side screen, and she could see the exact position of the human ship against the Dravak formation. She stared at the angle for a while. Something about where the ship was going bothered her in a way she could not immediately explain. She called up the formation overlay and spent 2 minutes looking at it. Then she saw it. The Iron Patience was not heading toward the fleet. It was heading to a point beside the fleet, a specific empty patch of space off the left flank of the formation that looked like nothing, just void, but from which the left arc of the Dravak line would be exposed in a way it was not from any frontal approach. She looked at Ferris. She said she did not think the human commander was buying time. Ferris asked what she meant. She said she thought the 3-hour window was not for Vok. She pointed to the position on the display. She said the human ship was using the 3 hours to get somewhere. Ferris studied the screen. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, that if that was the position Doran was aiming for, then 3 of the inner Dravak ships were going to be in their own firing line the moment the engagement started. Sova said yes. Ferris asked how a mid-weight warship with 41 crew was supposed to survive long enough to use that position even if it reached it. Sova did not have an answer for that. 2 hours and 40 minutes later, the Iron Patience reached the position. The Dravak fleet had not moved. Vok had apparently decided that watching the human ship wander into a flanking angle was less concerning than it should have been, possibly because no single warship had ever deliberately flanked a 14-ship formation before. The idea itself was strange enough to be dismissible. Doran opened the channel again. He said the 3 hours were up. He said the blockade was still in place. He asked if Vok had a final decision. Vok said his final decision was that the Iron Patience should enjoy its last few minutes. Doran said understood. He closed the channel. Then nothing happened for 11 seconds. Sova counted them. Later she would not be sure why she counted, but she did, standing at the observation window with her hands folded, watching the display, and she counted 11 seconds of complete stillness. On the 12th second, the Dravak fleet opened fire. The Iron Patience did not try to dodge. It was already exactly where it needed to be, and moving away from that position would have undone 2.5 hours of slow, careful maneuvering. Instead, the shields absorbed the first volley. They flared white and blue across the hull in a ripple that Sova could see from the station, a brief flash in the dark. The ship rocked. Internal alerts would be going off, hull stress readings, shield degradation percentages. Doran would be watching all of it. He fired once. One shot, not at the closest ship, not at the largest ship, not at the command ship. He fired at the 4th vessel in the outer ring, a mid-size cruiser sitting at a specific point in the formation that nobody watching would have considered a priority target. The shot hit clean. The cruiser's engine section detonated. The explosion pushed the ship sideways. The sideways movement pushed it directly into the path of the ship behind it, a larger destroyer that had been preparing to fire its second volley. The debris and shockwave from the engine detonation tore through the destroyer's forward shield array. 2 ships were suddenly not fighting. One was burning, one was blind. The Dravak formation broke inward trying to compensate. 3 inner ships that had been aiming at the Iron Patience now had friendly vessels crossing their firing lines. Sova pressed her hand flat against the cold observation window. Ferris said nothing, he just watched. The Iron Patience moved to its next position. There is a concept in Dravak military doctrine called the weight of numbers. It is not complicated. It means that when you have more ships, more guns, and more crew than your enemy, you win. You may take losses. You may take longer than expected. But the weight of what you have will eventually press the smaller force down until there is nothing left of it. The Dravek had built their entire military philosophy around this idea for 400 years. It had worked for 400 years. Admiral Vok believed in it the way some people believe in the reliability of sunrise. He stopped believing in it approximately 18 minutes into the engagement. The problem was not that the Iron Patience was winning. The problem was that it was not fighting the way a ship was supposed to fight. It was not trading fire. It was not trying to destroy ships. It was moving. Constantly, deliberately, always to a new position, and every new position it chose made something about the Dravek formation slightly worse than it had been before. After the first shot took out 2 ships, Vok had ordered his fleet to tighten and push forward together, a wall of firepower that no single vessel could survive. The Iron Patience had responded by pulling back slightly, not retreating, just enough to give itself room, and the tightening formation had accidentally blocked 3 of its own ships from having a clean angle on the human vessel. Vok had then ordered a split advance, 2 groups of 5 moving on separate vectors to corner the Iron Patience. The human ship had gone directly between the 2 groups at close range, too close for the Dravek gunners to fire without risking hitting their own ships, and in those 30 seconds of proximity had fired twice, both shots precise, both hitting engine or propulsion systems rather than weapons arrays. Not killing, disabling. It took Vok until the 3rd sequence to understand what Doran was doing. He was not trying to destroy the Dravek fleet. He was trying to reduce its mobility. A ship with dead engines was still a ship with guns, but it could no longer contribute to formation tactics. It became a stationary gun emplacement, and stationary gun emplacements could be avoided. By the time Vok understood this, 4 of his ships could no longer maneuver. He was angry in the particular way of a commander who has discovered that the battlefield is not the one he prepared for. He started issuing rapid orders, trying to compensate, trying to find the human ship's pattern and counter it. His officers executed the orders. The problem was that Doran's pattern changed every time Vok thought he had found it. On the Lithari station, Sova had stopped watching from the observation window and was now sitting in front of the tactical display with the compact observer's tracking system running on full, following every movement. Ferris had pulled up a chair beside her. Neither of them had spoken in 20 minutes. The display showed small symbols, squares for Dravek ships, a single triangle for the Iron Patience. The squares were in a loose and broken cluster now, many of them marked with the orange indicator that meant limited mobility. The triangle moved between them like something reading the room. Ferris finally spoke. He said he had fought in the Margin War 30 years ago as a junior logistics officer. He said he had seen fleet engagements from relay stations, in real time, and that they always looked like 2 groups trying to hit each other as hard as possible for as long as possible until one side stopped. He said this did not look like that. Sova asked what it looked like to him. He thought for a moment. Then he said it looked like someone taking apart a machine, not breaking it, taking it apart, piece by piece in the right order so that each removed piece made the next one easier to remove. Sova thought that was exactly right. On the bridge of the Iron Patience, Doran was reading damage reports between shots. The ship had taken 11 direct hits in the last 20 minutes. The shields had absorbed 8 of them. 3 had made it through to the hull. Deck 7 had a breach that was sealed but not repaired. 2 of his crew were in the medical bay. The shield array on the port side was running at 60%. He noted all of this without visible reaction and moved to the next position. Adele at the gunnery station had found a rhythm. The targeting system on a Resolute class was not the fastest in the fleet. It was accurate, but it needed time. Doran had structured the approach so that by the time they reached each new position, Adele had already had the coordinates for the next shot loaded for 60 seconds. The ship moved. The shot was ready. They fired and moved again before the Dravak could fully return fire. Adele had not eaten in 9 hours. He had not noticed. After the 11th shot, the total count stood at 4 ships destroyed, 6 ships disabled, and 4 ships still mobile and fighting. Vok was in that last group. He had pulled his remaining mobile ships into a close formation and was attempting to use coordinated fire to force the Iron Patience into a predictable dodge pattern. It was a reasonable tactical response. If the human ship had to move in a predictable way to avoid fire, it lost the ability to choose its next position freely. But Doran did not dodge. Instead, the Iron Patience took the coordinated volley on the forward shields and held its heading straight through it. The shields dropped to 30%. The hull screamed. One of the forward sensor arrays blew out completely. Doran watched the numbers and said nothing and kept the heading. He had seen the window. While Vok's 4 ships were all aimed forward and firing at once, none of them were watching the autonomous payload that the Iron Patience had quietly released 40 minutes ago in small batches during its approach movements. Proximity devices, each one no bigger than a cargo crate, drifting slowly and patiently to positions that nobody had been watching because everyone was watching the ship. Vok's ship sat in the middle of them. Doran looked at Petra. Petra looked at the display. Then she said very quietly that they were in position. Doran said good. He told her to wake them up. The devices activated. They were not weapons exactly. They were disruptors, designed to collapse the magnetic field buffers that Dravak's shield technology relied on. Each one alone did almost nothing. Together, in the pattern Doran had been laying out for 40 minutes, they dropped the shields on all 4 remaining Dravak ships simultaneously. It lasted 4 seconds. That was enough. The Iron Patience fired 4 times in 4 seconds. When the display updated on the Lithari station, the Dravak fleet had gone from 14 ships to 0 combat-capable vessels. Ferris sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. Sova was still watching the display. The Iron Patience triangle had stopped moving. It was drifting slowly, venting from 2 sections of its hull, shields nearly gone, 1 sensor array dark. But it was still there. Vok's ship was still functional. It had taken shield damage and lost its forward gun array, but the engines were running and the crew was alive, and the command systems were intact. That was enough for what he intended to do next. He turned the ship toward the nearest colony world. It was called Ulvan III, 60,000 civilians, mostly Lithari with a small population of Hevari traders and 2 human research scientists who had been there for a soil survey. The planet had no military presence, no shields, no defenses of any kind. It was a colony, not a fortress. Vok opened a channel to the Iron Patience. He said, "Stand down or I fire on the planet. I have enough left in my secondary arrays to reach the surface. You have 30 seconds to acknowledge." On the Lithari station, the council chamber erupted. People were standing, talking over each other. Someone was calling for an immediate response. Someone else was calling for an emergency compact signal. A third voice was saying it did not matter because 30 seconds was not enough time for anything. Sova sat very still. She was watching the Iron Patience on the display. It had not moved. It was still drifting in the same slow pattern it had been in since the last shots. She waited for it to accelerate or fire or do something. It did not fire. It did not accelerate. What it did was open a broadcast. Not a channel to Vok. A broadcast, sent on the open compact emergency frequency, received by every ship in the system including every Dravak vessel, every coalition receiver, the station, the colonies, and every relay point within range. The kind of signal that was recorded automatically by compact law and transmitted to the judicial archive within the hour. Doran's voice came through flat and clear. He read the Dravak ultimatum that had been sent 6 hours ago, word for word, including the sovereignty's official identification codes and the timestamp. He read the blockade coordinates. He read the duration of the blockade and the specific colony worlds targeted. He read Vox's current statement verbatim, including the threat to fire on a civilian population. Then he said, "This broadcast is being logged under Compact Article 19. Every officer currently serving under Admiral Vox's command is now personally identified as a participant in a threatened civilian atrocity. Under Compact law, personal liability does not require that the act be completed. Intention and command participation are sufficient." He paused. He said, "I am giving the crew of Admiral Vox's vessel 30 seconds to remove themselves from that order. Any officer who refuses a direct command to fire on civilians is protected under Compact military law. Any officer who follows that command is not." Then he closed the broadcast. In the council chamber, everyone had gone quiet. On Vox's ship, Sova could not see what was happening, but she could imagine it. 60 years of Dravak military culture running directly into the specific, cold reality that every single person on that bridge had just been named in a legal document that would outlast the battle by decades. That their families would see their names. That their names would be attached to whatever happened next. She counted the seconds. At 19, Vox's secondary array powered down. There was no announcement, no dramatic statement. The power reading on the array simply dropped to 0 on the tracking system and stayed there. Vox came back on the channel. His voice was different now. The warmth was gone. He said that the Iron Patience was in no condition to pursue any Dravak vessel and that this engagement was over. He said that the Sovereignty would file a formal protest with the Compact Council. Doran said, "File whatever you like. The blockade ends now. Your disabled ships will be boarded by Compact peacekeepers within the hour. Your crew will be processed according to standard protocols. Your command ship is free to leave the system." Vox said nothing further. His ship turned and began moving toward the system edge. On the station, someone in the council chamber started speaking very loudly about a great victory and the bravery of the Lithari coalition. Ferris looked at Sova and raised one eyebrow. She shook her head slightly. They both knew the Lithari coalition had not done anything except watch. She sent a message to the Iron Patience asking for a status report. The reply came from Petra, not Doran. It said, "2 crew in medical stable. Hull breach on deck 7 sealed. Port shield array at 22%. Commander is unavailable." Sova asked where the commander was. Petra replied, "Lower maintenance deck." Sova did not ask a follow-up question. She did not know what the lower maintenance deck meant, but the answer felt like the kind of information that explained something without explaining anything. The Iron Patience was still venting from 2 hull sections. On the display, it looked like a damaged ship doing its best. She supposed that was exactly what it was. Then a new contact appeared on the display. Not one contact, 6. They came out of faster-than-light travel at the far edge of the system, all at once, in a tight formation that meant they had arrived together on purpose. The tracking system identified them in 2 seconds. Dravak. Compact registration codes confirmed they were registered as a Sovereignty relief fleet. 6 warships, all combat-capable, all undamaged. Sova felt something cold move through her. She sent an immediate message to the Iron Patience. She said, "There are 6 Dravak warships that just entered the system. They are undamaged. You are not. Please tell me you have something left." She waited. The reply took longer this time, almost a full minute. Then Doran's voice came on, not Petra's, and he said, "We have enough. Keep the station clear." Sova read the message twice. She looked at the display. 1 battered human ship, 2 venting hull sections. shields at 22% on one side and probably worse on the other. 6 fresh Dravak warships moving slowly into the system. She did not know what enough meant in this context. She was about to find out. Sub-Admiral Drex had received the battle reports in fragments. The first fragment said that the blockade fleet had engaged an incoming human warship. The second fragment said 2 ships were disabled. The third fragment said 6 ships were disabled. After that, the fragments stopped being useful because the people sending them were too busy to write clearly. And by the time the relief fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Ulvan system, the tactical picture was exactly what the last coherent report had described. 0 combat-capable Dravak vessels. 14 ships reduced to wreckage or dead metal drifting in loose orbits. 1 human warship still present, venting atmosphere, visibly damaged. Drex stared at his display for a long time without saying anything. He was 34 years old. He had graduated top of his academy class. He had studied every major fleet engagement of the last 60 years, including all 11 conflicts where the sovereignty had faced technologically inferior opponents, and won by volume. He had an excellent understanding of force ratios and combat mathematics. He had 6 ships. The human had 1 damaged ship. The math said this should be easy. He hailed the Iron Patience. He said, "Human vessel, you are alone and damaged. The engagement is concluded. Stand down and prepare to be boarded, and your crew will be treated according to compact prisoner protocols." The response came back quickly. Doran's voice, unhurried, the same flat tone that every recording of the battle's communications had captured. Doran said, "Sub-Admiral, I have been in this system for a little over 5 hours. My ship has taken damage on 2 decks. I have 2 crew in medical. My port shields are running at 22% and my starboard shields are running at 31. I have fired my primary array 17 times today. I have not slept." He paused. He said, "You have 6 ships and I have 1. I understand the arithmetic, but I need you to understand something before you decide what to do next. Everything you watched happen to those 14 ships was done by this vessel in its current condition. Not a fleet, not a battle group. 1 ship in the state it is in right now against a force more than twice the size of yours." Another pause, shorter this time. He said, "I am still willing to do this again. That is not a threat. It is a fact. You should use it to make a better decision than your admiral made." Drex sat very still on his bridge. Around him, his officers were looking at their displays and then at each other. One of them pulled up the engagement record from the last 5 hours and began reviewing it at high speed. She stopped twice. Then she said quietly that the human ship had deployed autonomous proximity disruptors during movement passes, and that their own fleet had no countermeasure protocol listed for that specific combination of devices. Another officer said the Iron Patience's targeting pattern did not match any known Resolute-class configuration. A third officer said he was trying to identify what yield the primary array was using, and the numbers he was getting did not match the registry specifications for this ship class. Drex heard all of this. He was still looking at the display, 1 triangle, drifting, venting gas from 2 points on its hull, shields that should have failed 3 volleys ago. He thought about the 14 ships. He thought about his career, which had been built on the assumption that the Dravak sovereignty was the most capable military force in this region of space. He thought about the name of the ship he was looking at. Iron Patience. He thought that was a strange name for a warship. Most warships were named for battles or commanders or qualities like fury or strength or dominance. Patience was not a quality he associated with weapons. He was beginning to understand why humans might see it differently. He opened the channel again. He said he was requesting a temporary ceasefire and opening withdrawal negotiations pending Compact Council review. Doran said, "Accepted. Compact peacekeepers are already en route for the disabled fleet. I would suggest your ships hold position at the system edge until they arrive to avoid any confusion about intent." Drek said he understood. He closed the channel and told his fleet to hold at the system edge. None of his officers questioned the order. 3 hours later, Sova met Doran at the docking bay of the Coalition station, where the Iron Patience had come in for emergency repairs. She had prepared a formal statement in her head, something appropriate to the moment, something that acknowledged what had happened and what it meant for Coalition security and the future of the Compact's enforcement mechanisms. She forgot all of it when she saw him. He was shorter than she had imagined. He had a burn mark on his left sleeve that someone had tried to clean and had not fully succeeded. He looked tired in the specific way of a person who has been making decisions under pressure for many hours and has not yet found the moment to stop. He looked at her with the same expression he apparently used for everything. She said, "I want to ask you something." He said, "All right." She said, "When you answered our signal and you knew what was waiting here, were you ever uncertain? Did you consider that you might not win?" He was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone looking for a polite answer, the quiet of someone deciding how honest to be. He said, "Uncertain, yes. Every engagement has variables. I was not certain of the outcome. What I was certain of was that leaving was not something I was going to do." She asked him why. He looked past her for a moment at the docked ship through the bay window, at the repair crews already swarming over the hull patches, at the lit sections and the dark sections, and the places where the metal had been freshly scorched. He said, "Because someone asked for help, that is usually enough for us." Sova did not have a response to that. She stood there while he excused himself to check on his crew in the medical bay, and she watched him go. And she thought about the signal she had sent into the dark 6 hours before the Iron Patience arrived. The one she sent because she had run out of other options. The one she sent to a frequency she was not even sure was still active. Someone had been listening. In the Dravak home system, a report landed on the desk of the High Command the following morning. It had been compiled from the fragmented communications of the battle, the legal broadcast, the withdrawal records, and the testimony of surviving fleet officers. The officer who read it aloud summarized it in the flattest voice he could manage. 1 human ship, 1 star system, 14 Dravak vessels neutralized, relief fleet stood down without engagement, coalition worlds intact, no civilian casualties. The room was quiet for a while. Then someone said, "There are more of those ships." Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. They all knew it was true and they all knew what it meant, and none of them were quite ready yet to say that part out loud.